I don't know how many people get Living Lutheran, but in this month's issue, the January 2018 issue, there's an excerpt in here that I just want to read. It's from Bishop Eaton talking about the bishop of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Jordan and the Holy Land, Munib Yunan, who just recently retired, literally retired at the end of this calendar year. As my brother in Christ and colleague, Bishop Munib Yunan of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Jordan and the Holy Land has often said, the security of Israelis depends on the freedom of Palestinians, and the freedom of Palestinians depends on the security of Israelis. There's a little bit more. The topic was germane to recognition of Jerusalem as capital. But the reason why I like that is from the standpoint of where we were in the very beginning of the course and where we'll be through these competing narratives. What we'll see again tonight is the core identity of Israel's perspective is coming from security and defense. And the core filter and perspective of the Palestinian people is coming from freedom and dignity. So Bishop Yunan takes that a step forward and say they're both dependent upon each other. Israel will not be secure until Palestinians are free. Palestinians will not be free until Israel's secure. And that is a subtext of some of the things we'll be covering this evening. So a few questions that we'll delve into this evening is a little bit more of the infrastructure with regard to Israel and Palestine. We'll actually start out with geography, specifically on land size and population. We'll talk about the government, and then we'll get into the impact of Israel's authority on Palestine. And we'll be talking about that this week as well as next. And we'll start with East Jerusalem, then we'll move into the West Bank and look at urban centers in the West Bank with Bethlehem and Hebron, and then we'll talk about the country, the rural areas of the West Bank in terms of Area C. Okay, so geography of Israel and Palestine. What we have here is Israel and Gaza along the Mediterranean Sea. North of Israel, Lebanon, and northeast Syria, west Jordan, east Jordan, southwest Egypt. Okay, Gaza. Gaza's pretty small. Gaza's about a land size about twice the size of the city of Boston or twice the size of the city of Philadelphia. Gaza is 25 miles of coast, okay? So if there was a marathon, they'd have to do more than just run the length of Gaza. Gaza's width is as short as 5 miles and as long as about 7 or 8 miles. So think about that, you know, in terms of land size. It's pretty small. West Bank is about the size of Delaware, the state of Delaware. So here's a question for you, and the tip here is Israel's smaller than North Carolina. So basically, how many Israels would fit in North Carolina? How does Israel compare in size to North Carolina? Any guesses or thoughts on how many Israels fit in North Carolina? Throw out a number. 100? No, it's a little bit smaller than that. You have 6 1/4 Israels would fit into North Carolina. Now, the interesting thing, 6 1/4 would fit into North Carolina. State of North Carolina, a little over 10 million or so population. Israel, 8.2 million. So they're 80% of our population, but less than a sixth of our size. So in terms of population density, how does it compare? Israel is Israel is about 5 times more dense than North Carolina. Now, North Carolina is a fairly rural state. There's a lot of land in North Carolina. So this might not be a fair comparison. But nonetheless, just to give you a thought process with that. So what that would mean for North Carolina to feel like Israel, 5 Charlottes, 5 Raleighs, 5 Chapel Hills, 5 Salisburys, all in the same state, right? 5 Ashevilles, wherever you want to go with that, but 5 times. West Bank is actually a little more dense than Israel. West Bank is about 6 or so. And then Gaza, again, little tiny Gaza. Gaza has over 2 million people, and so there'd be the population density for us to experience in all of North Carolina, which is sort of somewhat ridiculous, would require like 62 Gazas. 62 Charlottes, 62 Raleighs. We can't fathom that, right? There's not enough land. We'd have to go into high rises, which in fact they have. They have multiple. It'd be like New York City, right? You cannot just take over the land with 1 or 2 story buildings. But that's the density that people are living with on a daily basis. So let's talk about infrastructure. I think most of us know, but let's make sure, Israel's government structure is a parliamentary democracy. They in fact have a president, but it's not equivalent to what we think a president. Their president is ceremonial. The analogous set of power and authority would be their prime minister. And in a parliamentary rule, there's a cabinet appointed by the prime minister, but the cabinet has to represent the political parties based on the distribution of votes to those parties. So there's a lot more alliances by political party, looking for common ground, trying to get into some level of agreement about what the agenda for the administration is going to be, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot more brokering among the parties. Now, the Knesset is the body that makes their laws. It's similar to our Congress. There's 120 members of the Knesset. Now, the interesting thing, when they vote for the legislative branch, the citizens of Israel, they don't vote for a personality. They vote for a party. And therefore, what's tallied up at the end of the vote is percentage distribution by party in terms of votes. And they usually cut it off. You have to get something like 3.25% to that party to actually qualify for being a potential seat in the Knesset. But it's cut off at 120 seats, and those 120 seats then are distributed by the proportion of people voting for that party, and the party then determines who are the representatives in the Knesset. People know who typically are going to be the representatives, but they're not voting for individual personalities. They're voting for the party platform. Now these parties, 120 members, how many parties there are? Well, now there's around 15, and they come in all shapes and sizes. Again, Israel is a Jewish state and a democracy, which there's sort of a juggling act or a balancing wire for that. But so you'll have secular parties, and then you have religious parties. You have secular Zionism, religious Zionism. You have Arab nationalism. You have some of these parties that are Zionist parties but are liberal. And basically what that mean would be liberal on all sorts of issues that we would find liberal in our society in the United States. Some of those liberal Zionist groups are pro-Palestinian and make some level of coalition or solidarity with the Arab nationalism groups, and some are not. So there's a lot of different things going on. Now, we're not going to spend hardly any time on the next point, but I find it pretty interesting, and I'm not sure how many people are aware of this. Their judicial branch, again, just like us, executive, legislative, judicial. Their judicial branch, they have a secular and religious judicial branch. So think about it this way. The secular one, you don't have a choice. You're a citizen, and so if you break the law, there's some dispute from a civil standpoint, you're accountable to the secular branch. The religious branch is you get sort of to choose, sort of, whether you're going to be accountable to that. Now, they're a Jewish state, so the religious branch has a government employees who are that follow the Judaism law, and so this would be Orthodox, mainly Orthodox. I don't think Reform get much into the judicial religious law, but whatever laws there are. Now these laws might be on marriage, but they might be on observance of things and some legal aspects of neighborhoods. Ultra Orthodox have signs in certain neighborhoods about warning women to dress modestly, which would mean maybe probably a third of the attire in the United States would be breaking that law in that neighborhood. And so things like that would come up in the religious aspect. However, Israel has under this branch not only Jewish law, there are government employees that are following Islamic law. And would be the same kind of thing. If you're a conservative Muslim and there was a dispute between you and another conservative Muslim on some of your religious laws, you could go to this court to resolve those. Now, there's also a Christian government employees under the judicial law. The Christian ones are typically probably more Orthodox Christian. There'd be marriage. If two people want to get married and be recognized by the church in Israel, they would go to the Christian court to have that be official. If you want to get divorced, again, I think most denominations nowadays, but there are, I think, certain aspects of the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church that they would actually go to the judicial system. This will be the last time I talk about the judicial system. Okay. Palestinian interim governments. I've mentioned this before, but I want to reiterate and emphasize the word interim. Back in 1968, or 67 and 68, when the Oslo Accords went into play after the Six-Day War, everybody, both sides internationally, felt this was an interim situation that was going to last a few years, maybe 3 to 5. So they designed basically structure in that vein or that strategy. And the reason I bring that up is that it's a government. They vote at times for representation, but like the tax situation in the West Bank, the money is not collected by the Palestinian National Authority. It's collected by Israel, and then they give it to the Palestinian Authority. And Palestinian Authority is somewhat boxed in a lot of ways. Not directly that there's an Israeli person over President Abbas, who's president of the Palestinian National Authority, but there's a lot of structure that limits what the Palestinian National Authority can do because of Israel's role. And the reason why, this was more viewed as like the Marshall Plan after World War II. This was going to take just a few years, and then we were going to have, like in World War II, we were going to have the new Germany or the new Italy, if you will. No one counted on it lasting 50 years in terms of the structure, okay? So what's the structure? Palestinian National Authority evolved out of what was the Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO, with Arafat. It's secular, and that's a major point to keep in mind. It controls both the security and civilian issues in Gaza and the West Bank until 2007. What happened in 2007? Split with Hamas. This was a big split. This was a civil war. This is where both parties were assassinating each other, assassinating government officials. This was not just sort of like a gentlemanly, we agree to disagree. And so at that point, Hamas was no longer, and up until this day, Hamas is not allowed to be a political, or is not allowed to be a recognized political party in the West Bank. You cannot become, you cannot affiliate with the Hamas party and run for office in the West Bank. West Bank, the Palestinian National Authority, they recognize Israel, and they're recognized as the Palestinian government by the U.S., Egypt, Israel, and allies. I think it was 2 years ago, Palestine received member status at the United Nations, non-voting member status. Before 2 years ago, Palestine was very much engaged at the United Nations. Countries would invite Palestine to meetings. They'd be able to talk to representatives of countries about their agendas or their issues. Those countries who were their allies could represent and talk to them about the United Nations. Now, the reason why I'm bringing that up is it was a big deal from officially by U.S. Actually, I guess we just consider it a big deal internationally. It was a big deal about them becoming member non-voting status. In reality, it's not much different than the day before that in terms of what it is. And now there's an official recognition and an affront to Israel, and the United States went up to the meeting, and they abstained from voting, and that was taken as an affront by Israel. So even though we didn't officially vote for it and thought it wasn't the right thing for Palestine to do, in reality, it really did not change. Tuesday was the same as Monday in terms of what was occurring. But a lot of saber rattling around that. Gaza and Hamas. Okay, currently Hamas is the ruling party in Gaza. It's a fundamentalist Islamic. It's a religious political party. Our filter about Hamas, when I hear the word Hamas, I'm thinking of a hooded soldier with an automatic weapon, suicide bomber, rocket launching, etc. In fact, Hamas provides a lot of social services in Gaza. Hamas provides some services in the West Bank, not officially, but they do. And if you hearken back to other vacuums, I've said this before, I'm not sure in this class, Cuba, ISIS, there are parties that rise, fill the gap or fill the hole for marginalized people, get the alliances going with those marginalized people, and then come up and do unfortunate things. So Hamas, here's one example. As I said before, they cannot be an official party in the West Bank. But if you're a man, or I shouldn't say a man, but I think it's mostly men, if you can't find employment in the West Bank, and the employment rate in the West Bank is very high, if you sign a letter of agreement with Hamas, you will get paid. Now, again, for most of us, we would say, okay, from a moral standpoint, no question. But if you're in a situation that you have limited or no opportunities, no future, maybe you've been burned a few times on things, it can get awfully tempting. Now, in Yatta, we would drive by places, and out of all the slums or the middle place, all of a sudden you'd see a mansion that looked like it was from West Palm Beach in Florida. And I'd ask the driver, who's that? And sometimes our driver would say, oh, that's the owner of the quarry, or et cetera, et cetera. Other times he would say, that's bad money. And I don't know if that was Hamas or what, but he would point out different places, and you'd see it. So that is occurring in the West Bank. Another aspect is that they are attempting to reconcile, they being Fatah and Hamas. Why? We'll talk more about Gaza next week, but some of you might be well aware of the situation in Gaza. Gaza, by the, I think, United Nations standpoint, United Nations originally said Gaza will be uninhabitable by the year 2020. Last year, United Nations said they're ahead of schedule. Things are very bad in Gaza. One of the aspects of Gaza is there's no such thing as 24/7 electricity or access to drinkable water right out of the tap in your home. Those days have been long gone. Part of it has been that the Palestinian National Authority controls resources going into Gaza, particularly electricity. So Fatah has been using that as a leverage against Hamas and limiting some of the electricity. Reconciliations that were this fall, they were discussed. Hamas said, we'll provide more electricity if you allow us to be the civil government. Hamas said yes. And Fatah also said another term is that, oh, and I forgot to mention this, it was on the slide. Hamas has a militant wing about 25,000 people, and they refuse to recognize Israel, which means they want Israel destroyed. So in this reconciliation, one of the terms Fatah has is we want the Palestinian National Authority to have the control of all weapons related to that 25,000 militia. Hamas seemed to indicate that they were positively inclined, and so the reconciliation, or the terms were signed. Fatah has provided more electricity. Now Hamas is sort of saying, not so much on the weapons. So there's a big question mark about whether this reconciliation will actually work. It's sort of ambiguous right now about whether the terms will prevail. Another aspect, those are the two governments in Gaza and West Bank, and then also we talked about the Israeli government. West Bank. Association for Civil Rights in Israel put out a paper, one rule, two legal systems. So here's basically the legal structure in the West Bank. For Israeli residents, which would be typically in settlements, Israeli settlers, they are covered under most of Israeli law. They're Israeli citizens, and they pretty much have all the rights of still maintain all the rights in the West Bank. There's additional legislation by the military commander that applies solely to Israeli residents. Think about what we said earlier about the core identity of Israel. Okay, security, safety, security. So, what do you think? I just gave you a big hint. What do you think most of this legislation that's solely to the Israeli residents of the West Bank is about? About their safety and security. And we'll show you an example of that. Palestinian residents. Now, Jordanian law, they were part of Transjordan prior to, or after, before 67, between 48 and 67, they were part of Transjordan. Well, before 48, they were part of the British Mandate. And before the British Mandate, they were part of Ottoman Empire. So they're part of Jordanian law, but because they were Transjordan and people had proof of private ownership from the Ottoman Empire or some deals with some aspects from the British Mandate, Jordanian law had brought those in. So the Palestinian residents, basically, their legal system is a gold mine for attorneys or lawyers, because they basically view it as they have legislation by the military commanders, they have Jordanian law, British Mandate, and Ottoman Empire. All of these, as we know with law, a lot of it is precedent from history. So all of these can be brought up in a court in terms of disputes. So there's a lot of complications, a lot of digging and ambiguous aspects of being a resident, a Palestinian resident in the West Bank. Now, legislation by the military commander that applies solely to Palestinian residents. I'll cut to the quick. It's the same answer as with the Israeli residents. The law specific to by the military commander for the Palestinian residents is based and focused on security and safety of the Israeli residents. So there'll be specific laws that we'll go through here in just a second that'll make that clearer. It will actually walk through a case study. But first, here's an example of specific laws toward Israelis in the West Bank. What you have here is a sign, a road sign. We're in Area C, about to go into Yatta, which is in Area A. We'll talk about A, B, and C in just a minute. The signs in Hebrew, Arabic, and English, and I'll read it in case you can't see it. This road leads to Area A under the Palestinian Authority. The entrance for Israeli citizens is forbidden, dangerous to your lives, and is against the Israeli law. So Israeli residents of the West Bank legally are not allowed to enter Area A. Okay, this is one example. Okay, here's the case study that's in the book about one rule, two legal systems. And I had some personal experience with a part of this, so I can vouch for elements of the disparity, if you will. Okay, two people that live in Hebron have an altercation, actually break out into a fight. One's Jewish, one's Palestinian. What happens? The Jewish is a resident of a settlement within the urban area of Hebron, Kirhat Abba. He's taken to a nearby police station, immediately interrogated, and is brought within 24 hours to the magistrate court in Jerusalem. In the hearing, the judge decides to order his release on condition of bail. It's not a very severe case. The defendant pleads self-defense. Okay? What happens to the Palestinian that disturbed the peace and fought with the Jewish man? He's a resident of Hebron. He's arrested for 96 hours, 4 days, before being brought before a military judge. He is de facto interrogated only once during this period of time under suspicion of committing an assault based on nationalistic motivations, which is a security offense. He's tried before a military court where he faces a penalty of extended incarceration. The part that I can vouch for is that on most any kind of charge, you can be incarcerated for 4 days. Now, when we say incarcerated and it says only interrogated once, this incarceration of 96 hours, you will not be allowed to talk to your family member. You will not be allowed to talk to your attorney up to 4 days. Your lawyer in this case, if you have an attorney, your family knows about it, they'll obtain an attorney. It's likely you will not meet or able to talk to your attorney until the day you go before the military judge, that day, that morning. Now, the attorney might be working on your behalf, but you have no clue as to what's going on until that interrogation.
Did the Palestinian plead self-defense?
Pardon?
Did the Palestinian in this altercation plead self-defense?
The Palestinian in this altercation doesn't get to plea any kind of, he has no rights. He doesn't get to, there's no, let me put it this way. The case that I know personally, an individual was charged with threatening somebody and getting in a heated argument and threatening somebody. Israeli police came to the house, arrested him, and he was immediately incarcerated for 3 days. He went to a prison. This was in a jail. He went to a regular prison for 3 days. And when they came, and this is, let me go back from the standpoint of the filter and the perspective. When we say military judge, why did he go before a military judge before the Jerusalem magistrate? He is not considered a citizen. This is all about Israeli security and defense. We have a Palestinian in an altercation with a Jewish man in the West Bank. The military, if they are going to assume responsibility for security of Israelis in the West Bank, from a military perspective, not a legal or governmental, from a military perspective, as commander of the military, what are you going to do? You are going to assure 120%, maybe 150%, that your primary goal of security and safety for the Israelis is paramount. So you don't care about the other person's civil liberties or rights. This is a military objective. This is a military organization. We'll see more of this they are not in Senate. It's not on their radar to consider Palestinian rights. Their job is to assure security and safety for Israel in all costs. So they have a process to find out what happens after the fact. But in the beginning, as a military person, I don't know, how many people were here in the military? Maybe I was the only, okay. In the beginning, yeah. In the beginning, as in the military, you are not about to try to figure out what's going on. You're going to stop the situation, neutralize the situation, and figure all that out later. You are not concerned about initial rights of an individual. Now, I'm not saying this person's tortured, etc., but there's disparity in the situation. Okay? Did that help, Davis?
Is there an analogous judicial system of the Palestinian Authority? There is
Well,
one?
not in the West Bank in terms of an altercation with somebody from Israel. If there's two Palestinians fighting in Yatta, there's an analogous system. In Yatta, it would probably be the mayor, but there could be some national. Yeah, somebody tries to assassinate a boss. That would be dealt by the Palestinian National Authority. Okay, this is sort of geography and population and stuff, but I probably might have changed the sequence on here, but we've been talking about the alphabet soup, A, B, C, okay? So, basically, Area A is where most of the Palestinians live, and they're urban areas. This would be Ramallah, Hebron, Yatta, Bethlehem, and that is about 20% of the land. There's 18% of the land that basically is a buffer zone around all the Area A. Area B is always sort of contiguous to Area A, and it's a less population, mostly rural area around the Area A, and that's 18%. Area C, I'm sorry, this is joint government between both Palestinian National Authority and Israel. Area C is total auspices of Israeli government, and the Israeli government here is military. They call it civil authority, but they are military individuals in civil positions in Area C, and then there are military outposts and military soldiers and border patrols. Depending on sources, for whatever reason, they can't get a precise handle on Palestinians. It's somewhere between 180 and 300, and Israelis about 325. So it could almost be 50-50. On the Israeli side, there's 125 settlements and 100 outposts. My sources that I tend to stay with is the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Human Affairs. That's where this map comes from, and will be in the session guide. So that's a background on land and population. So let's now start into talking about Israeli authority over places where the Palestinians live. Now, the first one is not part of the West Bank. The first one is in Jerusalem, East Jerusalem. And we talked about this a little bit, maybe the first session, and perhaps a little bit with Rhodes' session as well, that originally the Old City was supposed to be, and actually even around the Old City, way back when, this is back during the United Nations resolution, to be an international space. Never happened, and that's pretty much history in terms of any kind of consideration. But if we go here just a little bit, I want to talk about the Old City. So, how many people have been to the Old City? To Jerusalem or the Old City? Okay. And perhaps more than you, others are aware of sort of the layout. So what we have, from a population standpoint, there's 4 sections that are called the Muslim quarter, Christian quarter, Jewish quarter, and Armenian quarter. 3 of them are pretty self-descriptive. The Armenian quarter is typically Christian, I mean, there's certainly all Arabic, but there's a lot of Christians in the Armenian Quarter. So what we have are places many of us have heard about. Here's where the original Jewish temple was built, and Al-Aqsa Mosque is right there. Dome of the Rock, the original rock of ancient Jerusalem area is right there. Western Wall, a very sacred place for Jews, and I would say a sacred place for many Christians, a very moving place to go. And the tradition is to write a prayer on a piece of paper and tuck it in between two stones. Muslim Quarter, Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where we commemorate Jesus' crucifixion and also his burial, resurrection and burial. And then that's the Old City, which, as we see here, was part of Transjordan up until 1967. The state of Israel from between 48 and 67 was this gray area outlined with the green line. This is the 1949-67 armistice green line. Okay. After 67, the municipality of Jerusalem was defined as such. So what you have here after 67 is Israel, from an authority standpoint, controls all of this and names it Jerusalem. So they were over here after 67. This is how Jerusalem is defined. What is encapsulated in that is where the Palestinians were living prior to 67 for quite a few years. And so you can almost see the armistice line outlined by the Palestinian build-up area. This is where it was, what you saw before. Now Jerusalem is defined this way, all considered the state of Israel today, and here's the Old City. So over here, within Jerusalem, but all these areas that are green are considered East Jerusalem. That's a term that Palestinians use. Israelis do not use the term East Jerusalem. They view the municipality of Jerusalem, which is truly the governmental authority over this entire area. Okay. So since 67, the blue depicts areas that have clustered into Israeli neighborhoods or Israeli built-up areas. And you'll notice that in the Old City, back to the Jewish quarter, it's been built up with Jews, and then you'll just see them sort of fitting in like a jigsaw puzzle, pieces that were not where Palestinian areas were concentrated on. So one thing I'd like to point out before we move on is let's go back to the Old City. And we have the quarters labeled here. But another point since 67 is that now all these red triangles are what are called Israeli settlements. Israel has not only populated the Jewish quarter, they're purchasing land in the Muslim quarter and the Christian quarter and populating those areas. So even in, we talk about settlements and we think about the West Bank, there are basically what's viewed by the same definition, settlements within the Old City. Now, one of the reasons I bring that up is I don't think many people are aware of it, and we'll show you another thing here. But the other thing is the implications of that when we hear things about Jerusalem, Israel, allowing the holy city to be free and open to all three faiths. That's true from a government policy standpoint. I firmly believe it. They're generating income from the tourists, and they want those all open. However, there's ideological Israelis that have encamped, that make up a lot of the Israeli settlements in the West Bank. But there are some ideological Israelis who are making up settlements in Muslim and Jewish quarter. And they are having associations and tantalizing property owners or absentee owners with exorbitant sums of money to purchase a property. Here, this picture is in the Muslim quarter. It's part of the Via Dolorosa, Stations of the Cross, or Jesus walking to his crucifixion. And notice up here on the second floor of this storefront, Israeli flags. This signifies an Israeli settlement in the Muslim quarter. There will be other areas where you're going along, and then all of a sudden you see an Israeli flag. Up here, there might be 2 or 3 families. When we talk about settlement, we're not in the old city. These aren't huge number of people in any one place, but they are ideological Israeli citizens, Jews, who are there, and they are establishing a community. They want to purchase more land for the purpose of populating the old city with a higher proportion of Israeli citizens. Okay? Questions or comments on that?
So if I were a Christian or Muslim landowner or owner, can I say to a Jewish zealot, I won't sell to you?
Right. But let's paint another scenario. Let's say instead of you being your youthful age right now, you're 95, and your children have moved to Germany and England. There's nobody here. And then all of a sudden you pass away, and your children are in Germany and England. Maybe they have distant memories of living in Palestine. Maybe they've checked out. Maybe it's your grandchildren that are having to manage your estate. And they get contacted when the organization finds out you own that property. You get contacted by an international representative of this organization that has a very ambiguous name to it, and says, we're willing to pay you. And you say, my gosh, when I talked to my extended family, they said it was worth half of what you're offering. So what do you do? So that's how it works. Yeah, you might not know. You might want to fool yourself into it. Frankly, the other thing, and I don't want to, anyway, there's issues with certain church organizations that own land in the old city that are financially strapped, and they get tempted into selling to the highest bidder. And they'll say, well, we're selling land that's, now I shouldn't say the old city. Controversies right now is that there's certain church denominations, Christian organizations, financially strapped, own a lot of land, and what they're doing to develop cash is sell land to the Israelis. And when the Palestinian activists find out about it, they're fervently opposed. Now, but let me be clear. There's not evidence of that in the Old City. There's evidence of that in Jerusalem and other parts of Israel where there are holy sites, but maybe not as holy as the Old City. So this is an issue that's happening literally today. Okay? On the left side, the right side, this I was stationed in Yada, but they encourage you to go for a couple days for field assignments elsewhere to experience other things. And while I was in Jerusalem, in East Jerusalem, with my colleagues who are down here, one being American and one being from Germany, this house was demolished in East Jerusalem. This gentleman's a father of 3, 2 early elementary school kids and a newborn, and he did not get a permit for his house. He built his house on his own private land without a permit, But what he did do was get a lawyer to give him and go to the court and have the court rule that he would have an extension or be able to stay in his house. And every time he did that, he got an annual extension or extension for 12 months. The last time they went, he got an extension for only 6 months, and it went till May 15th, 2016. He was at work. His wife was at the doctor because she had a recent C-section. It was a follow-up visit with the baby, and the two older girls were in school. Got a call from a neighbor while he was at work. The neighbor said, there's a demolition crew at your house. So he stopped, went back with his got his papers, and showed the city official with the demolition crew that he had an authorization until May 15th. The city official looked at the papers, turned to the demolition crew and said, I'll be back in 1 hour, I'll have this resolved. City official went to the magistrate court, got the very same judge that had signed the authorization on May 15th, had the judge line through the signature, initial it, and put the current date as the last day that he was allowed to live in his house. They came back. They started destroying his house. In the hour that between he started taking out certain personal possessions, wasn't able to take out everything within an hour. His house and most of the family's possessions were destroyed. At the end of the demolition, he was handed a bill for 15,000 shekels for the cost of the demolition crew. This is very common. Some Palestinians, when their house is going to be demolished, they are given advance notice and told, you can demolish your own home at your expense, or we'll demolish it for you, but you'll pay for the contractor. Why doesn't he get a permit? We'll talk about that in a minute, but basically 91% of permit applications by Palestinians are declined. There's no rule or policy that they have to be responded by in a certain time frame. So you might not hear for a couple of years, and so the thought process is, I'll start fighting on the other side of this. Instead of going through this process and hearing no, I'll build and get a lawyer and hopefully see fit that we can stay here. It didn't work out for that other gentleman. This is basically just a map. I mean, there are statistics here, but you're not going to retain those. Just a map. Again, this is not in the West Bank. This is Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, where the Palestinians live. This is not under military law. This is under the municipality of Jerusalem. You have in the Old City, 81 under demolition orders, and in the Old City, these are in the gray. If you look at them all, at this point in time, it was 180 households, 818 Palestinians, 372 of whom are children. So you see it they don't live in West Jerusalem, but all around in East Jerusalem, there are Palestinians at risk of eviction. This is a very dense infographic slide by Visualizing Palestine. So just as a due diligence thing, Visualizing Palestine is pro-Palestinian. I found their infographics engaging and compelling. Sometimes I have not found an out-and-out lie or misinformation, but sometimes it's put in a lens that I don't feel comfortable with. So there's a few I'm just going to point out here in terms of what it is. Basically, in all of Jerusalem, right now, Palestinians approximate about 40% of the population. The evictions and a number of other aspects, there's every evidence that Jerusalem governmental authorities would like that proportion to be different. They don't want 60-40. They want something higher for the 60 and lower for the 40. What we have here, any Jew coming from anywhere in the whole world can still go to Israel and become an Israeli citizen. Since 1967, 14,500 residents of East Jerusalem have lost their residency or been revoked their status as citizens of Jerusalem. Let me see, two others I want to talk about. Oh, here's an interesting one. Budget for the for the city. 89% of the city's revenue goes for services for 63% of the population. This is schools, healthcare facilities in West Jerusalem versus East Jerusalem. So basically, the third of the 37% or 40% of the Palestinian population is only receiving 10% of the services provided by the city. 75% of the Palestinians are under the poverty line who are Jerusalem citizens. And back to the permit thing, 93% of building permits are issued to the Jews, only 7% to Palestinians. Bethlehem. People in Bethlehem are walled in on three sides. This is the Bethlehem side of the wall. These walls are not are high, and they are not walls like we have in our beautiful highways here in North Carolina, where there's wildflowers next to them and shrubs, etc. So it feels when you're near the wall. Much of the city's not near the wall, but it feels when you're near the wall that you are imprisoned. And these are pictures I've taken. There's part of the wall in the corner here that has a lookout tower for the Israeli military. However, if I had to choose to live in a place in the West Bank, I don't think I could do much better than live in Bethlehem. If you go into Bethlehem, parts of Bethlehem, if you go into the old city of Bethlehem, you feel like you're in an international city, a European city. It's very nice. This is a picture of Christmas Lutheran Church in the old city, cabs, tourism, etc. Picture of good friends from Christmas Lutheran Church, Adel, Nasser and his wife, Karamia, and they had a former bishop's wife over for a Sunday meal with me after service at the church. They live in a very nice home in Bet Jala, sort of a suburb of Bethlehem. However, even in Bethlehem, this is a picture of a resident, a house that lives near a road, near a settlement. This is out in the outskirts of Bethlehem, more of a suburb or rural area. And this house has about 20 or 30 olive trees between the house and the road. So what was happening, not at this house, but further up this road, probably a couple miles, near the settlement, at times when military vehicles or contractors would come out of the settlement, somebody was throwing stones behind trees at the vehicles as they went by. As far as I know, there weren't any serious consequences of the stones, but they were throwing stones. So, Israeli military hired a contractor, went down the street. Every resident who had trees, the contractor did not go up to the houses to notify them. They just started cutting down limbs and trees to assure that no one could really hide behind the trees, between the trees and the road. After they cut the trees, they left a note, they knocked on the door and left a note with this gentleman's wife as to explaining why they cut down the trees. This cut here, the owner of these olive trees, his crop for this was in May. They harvest in the fall. His crop's ruined for this year. Based on how they cut the branches off the olive tree, he's estimating it will take 15 years before he can realize the same level of income that he had on these olive trees. No compensation, no opportunity to go to court and debate or dispute this, as we would, again, we have eminent domain, we have reasons why these things happen in the United States, but there is no opportunity of that civil liberty that we just take for granted in Bethlehem. And this is Area A, where you have Palestinian National Authority. How were they able to do this in Area A? They determined it was a military risk. and they are the military authority. So they just did it. And when they use the word closed military zone, military risk, they are absolved about going through any kind of due process that you might have in a normal civil situation. Okay, I said it was nice in Bethlehem, but if you couldn't get a job in Bethlehem and had to go over to Israel, not so nice. And there's a lot of people in the West Bank, economic opportunities very limited. They covet to have a work permit to have a job in Israel. And this is a typical commute from the West Bank to Israel for a day at work. This video was produced by Israeli pro-Palestinians, and I witnessed this. This is a photo that I took, and this photo that I took also, I'm there at 4:30 a.m., and the line, that corridor with the gates, that's probably about 60 yards long. And then you saw them going through the turnstiles. When they go on the other side of the turnstiles, they're not in Israel yet. They go through those turnstiles, then they walk about 30 yards into another building, which is like our TSA, where they go through medical detectors and then the work permits. And there's a certain small percentage of those people that wait all that time, go through the line, and then are denied entry. And we're there to observe and document the reasons for denied entry and then feed that to the United Nations, OCHA, Office of Human Affairs. So you heard or saw a few things here. Now, what's going on here in that other picture? You saw people climbing along the guard fence above the wall. They're all cutting in line. They're going side by side until they get to the very front by the turnstile, and then they drop down. You saw a couple of them shimmy through a gated side entrance to get to that in front of the line. Why are they doing that? They don't want to be late for work. Some of the contractors will have shuttles on the other side waiting for the workers. If they're not there at a certain time, the shuttle leaves. So a lot of them are pressured to get there. Some of the younger guys don't get up as early as that one gentleman who said 2 o'clock. So think about that. This guy said he got up at 2 o'clock to get to work that starts at 6. Let's say it's an 8-hour day. But let's go backwards. What time of the evening do you have to go to bed if you get up at 2 o'clock and you want 8 hours of sleep? 6 p.m. Is that right? 6 p.m.? That's before, and 2 that's only 6 hours of sleep. So the point here is the emotional, physical, mental toll it takes for a person to get a half-decent job in Israel with a work permit, which may or may not be approved when he goes through. So the consequences of that, sleep deprivation, going through these kind of lines every day, every morning, fighting amongst yourselves or the competition. You know, I mean, we have road rage. I get peeved if someone, I'm in line and I'm cooperating with the line and somebody comes down the left lane and goes all the way up to the top, or all the way up to the front. I'm a baby. I'll cry about having to go down to Charlotte and it's supposed to only take 45 minutes and takes an hour and a half, and I'm all out of sorts for that. These individuals, the consequences are not only for them, from women and children issues. They get home. How much time do they get they get one day off? How much time do they have with their kids or their families? It's a paternalistic society anyway. They get home, they're tired, they're cranky. I get tired and cranky, and BJ doesn't tolerate it very well. Over there, just think about it. I mean, the ripple effects of an individual, mostly men, but there's some women too, mostly men going through this, and the ripple effects on women and children as well as the men. Okay? And these are real. I've had discussions with Palestinian women about this very thing. Alcohol abuse, being distant, etc. All because of these kinds of issues or processes. Were you about to say something?
The other thing they said, it's May and it's Ramadan, so they're fasting from sunrise to sunset.
Right, and I was, I'm sorry.
By the time they get home,
Right.
break fast, they go to prayer, then they're usually up fairly
Yeah.
late with family meals, so, and.
Yeah. I was there during Ramadan, and you can you do sense that at times. On the positive side, when we were there, and this checkpoint, but also another checkpoint down on South Hebron Hills, we have flyers that we would hand out if somebody came up and was speaking Arabic and asked, why are you here, or whatever. And so we'd have a flyer. The survey about why you were refused entry was all in Arabic as well. We'd have people read the flyer, look up, and just say, thank you for being here. You know, they knew we weren't going to be able to stop the situation. Again, another common saying, this is our life. But I'd have men who would be in that line, and I'd be just walking by, and they would just say thank you. And I wasn't doing anything besides counting and recording things. But they felt someone was here observing, the information's getting out about what we have to experience, how we live. Hebron is an urban area. We've talked about Hebron before. Sarah buried there. There's a cave of the patriarchs. So the history goes back, and it's considered a holy area for both Jews, Muslims, and Christians. Hebron, perhaps, is the most intense place between Palestinians and Jews, because there's an H1, H2, an urban area that has lines literally down the street, Shahada Street here, that on one side is Israeli and the other side Palestinian. These Israelis are very ideological. They purposefully want to be there to be provocative. The Palestinians used to have a lot of shops here, these homes. You'll see here, outside of tours and some groups of kids having to go to school or whatever, people aren't on this street unless that live in the area that unless they have a strong purpose of having to get to another place. These were all homes and storefronts. It got so bad that they were all, people lived in these places, but they shuttered off the front windows and doors and established entrances out the back of their homes. And here's just, again, here, and it's been violence on both sides, dating back to 1929 when Palestinians massacred Jews because of the rumor that there was going to be a Jewish attack against the dome on the mount. So it's dating back to 1929, but since 1929 there have been atrocities on both sides. And here's a take from a Jewish perspective. These stores were closed by the IDF for security reasons after Arabs began the Oslo War, aka the Second Intifada, in September 2000, attacking, wounding, and murdering Jews on this road. That's true. There's aspects of accountability, the same level of atrocity in terms of Israelis. So today, I went on a tour, and it was led by, we'll talk more about this next time or later when we talk about activism, but the tour is led by, this woman's name is Murphy. She's an Israeli citizen, Israeli Jew, and Murphy was a soldier in the West Bank. And now, after being a soldier, she's a young woman. She is part of an organization called Breaking the Silence. And we'll be talking more about Breaking the Silence. The long and short of it is Breaking the Silence is only made up of former Israeli soldiers who had assignments in the West Bank, who during that assignment came to the conclusion, this is not what I signed up for. I'm willing to defend my country against Libya or terrorism, but what I'm doing over here with the Palestinians and the security of the Israeli settlements is nothing that I agree with. And now, anybody part of Breaking the Silence, and you can go to their website and we'll be talking about it more, they have testimonies about their experiences in Hebron, and I'm going to show you one right now. See where that sign was that said, warning to Jews, don't go any further. One day we came upon some soldiers there, and that's not odd. I mean, the soldiers can put up a temporary checkpoint anywhere, and usually you go up and they might ask a couple questions, they might not. They might ask to see your ID, they might not. This one day we showed up, 3 soldiers there. They stopped the car. They asked our driver, who's Palestinian, to get out, to turn the car off, show them the keys. He did. They asked him to put the keys on the top of the roof of the car. They asked him to get out of the car. They tried to tell him, I think, to put his ID on the ground and then step away. He misunderstood, thinking that they wanted him to raise his hands and kneel down. That when he did bring out his ID and put it down on the ground, as they said, 2 of the soldiers raised their weapons, aimed it at him, and walked toward him. The soldier in the middle went down to get the ID, pick it up, look at it, gave it back to him, and then put it back down, and then told him he could come back and pick up his ID while the weapons were pointed at him. And then the soldier asked him, who are the 2 people in the car? He told them they were internationals. And then all of a sudden, all 3 soldiers smile, look at us, and wave the car through. And so we were all surprised, somewhat shaken, but afterwards, I remarked on the way into Yada, I said to Abed, I think that was a military training exercise. Now, Abed was visibly shaken, and I was trying to say that to help him emotionally. His reaction was in a quivering voice, don't they know I'm human? Why does that have to be a training exercise? Why would you treat another person that way?